Picture this: England, the mid-1400s, the long, bloody 100 Years' War with France is sputtering to a disastrous end. The once mighty English kingdom, which had stretched its fingers deep into French territory, is now shrinking, beaten back, and humiliated. Back home, the mood is sour, the economy is in shambles, nobles are restless, and the common folk are weary of war and taxes. It's a kingdom on the brink of a breakdown. Sitting on the throne is King Henry VI. Now, Henry is a good man, pious and gentle, but he's a terrible king. He's indecisive, easily manipulated, and suffers from bouts of severe mental illness that leave him completely unresponsive for months at a time. In the cutthroat world of medieval politics, a weak king is like blood in the water, and the sharks are beginning to circle. The real power isn't held by the king, but by the powerful nobles and his ambitious French queen, Margaret of Anjou. This is where the real trouble begins. The ruling family, the House of Plantagenet, is a sprawling dynasty with many branches. But two, in particular, are on a collision course. First, there's the House of Lancaster, the current royal line. Their symbol is the red rose. King Henry VI is a Lancastrian. They've held the throne for 3 generations, but their claim is a bit shaky, having taken it by force decades earlier. They represent the establishment, the current power structure, clinging to a crown that many feel they don't truly deserve. Then, we have the challengers, the House of York. Their symbol is the white rose. They are led by the immensely powerful and popular Richard, Duke of York. Richard is everything King Henry is not: a capable administrator, a proven military commander, and a man with a charisma that inspires loyalty. Crucially, Richard of York has a very strong, arguably better, claim to the throne through his own royal lineage. He's the wealthiest man in England and feels he should be the one guiding the kingdom, not the inept counselors surrounding the weak King Henry. For years, the tension between these two houses just simmers beneath the surface. It's a cold war fought in the corridors of power, in whispers at court, and through political maneuvering. The Yorkists argue for reform, for strong leadership, for a return to English glory. The Lancastrians, protective of their power, see the Duke of York not as a reformer, but as a threat, an overmighty subject with his eyes on the throne itself. Think of it like 2 heavyweight boxes sizing each other up. On one side, the Red Rose of Lancaster, weakened but still the reigning champion. On the other, the White Rose of York, powerful, hungry, and ready to challenge for the title. The nobles of England start choosing sides, their banners splitting between red and white. Loyalties are tested, and old friendships begin to fracture. Every political appointment, every royal decree, every failed battle in France becomes another point of contention, another log on the fire. The country is becoming a checkerboard of red and white. A dispute over a piece of land in the north or a trade disagreement in the south could now escalate, pulling in the great lords of Lancaster and York. The personal rivalry between Richard of York and the Queen's favorite, the Duke of Somerset, becomes the flashpoint for the entire kingdom's anxieties. One is a war hero, the other is blamed for the defeats in France. Their hatred for each other personifies the larger conflict. It's a perfect storm. You have a powerless king, a fiercely protective queen, an ambitious challenger with a legitimate claim, and a country full of heavily armed, disgruntled nobles just looking for an excuse to fight. The stage is set. England holds its breath, waiting for the first spark that will ignite the flames of civil war. The time of whispered plots is ending. Soon, the arguments will no longer be settled in council chambers, but on the battlefield. The Wars of the Roses are about to begin. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, where swords are finally drawn.
History isn't just what happened, it's what was hidden. Welcome to the Chrono Archives, where lost empires rise again, forgotten legends speak, and ancient truths are brought back to life. From world-shaping history and powerful myths to legendary rulers and timeless civilizations, every story here is carefully uncovered, deeply researched, and cinematically told. The past is calling, will you answer? Subscribe and journey through time, one unforgettable chronicle at a time.
England, mid-15th century, a kingdom simmering with discontent. King Henry VI, a gentle but ineffectual ruler, sat on a throne propped up by a circle of powerful, often greedy nobles. The people suffered, justice was for sale, and the recent loss of lands in France had left a bitter taste in everyone's mouth. The country was a powder keg, and all it needed was a spark. That spark had a name: Richard, Duke of York. Richard was everything Henry was not. He was a capable soldier, a proven administrator, and he had a claim to the throne that was, in the eyes of many, stronger than the king's own. He saw the corruption at court, the weakness of the king, and the growing chaos in the realm. He didn't just see it, he felt it was his duty to fix it. He presented himself not as a usurper, but as a reformer, the man who would restore order and good governance to England. He returned from his post in Ireland, not quietly, but with an army at his back. His initial aim, he claimed, was simply to remove the king's evil counselors, chief among them the Duke of Somerset, his bitter rival. He marched on London, demanding a place on the king's council, demanding to be heard. The royal court was thrown into panic. Was this a loyal subject seeking justice, or a rebel seeking a crown? The line was dangerously thin. This challenge to royal authority couldn't be ignored. The king, or rather the Queen, Margaret of Anjou, who was the true power behind the throne, refused to yield. To her, York was a traitor, a direct threat to her husband's rule and her son's inheritance. The court was divided. Some saw York as a much-needed remedy for England's ills. Others saw him as an overmighty subject whose ambition threatened to tear the kingdom apart. Words gave way to weapons. The First Battle of St. Albans in 1455 was the moment the simmering tension exploded into open warfare. It wasn't a huge battle by the standards of the day, more of a violent street brawl that escalated, but its consequences were immense. York's forces stormed the town, and in the chaos, his main rival, the Duke of Somerset, was killed. King Henry himself was captured, found hiding in a tanner shop, wounded by an arrow. The sight of a king, God's anointed ruler, captured and wounded on an English street was shocking. The sacrosanct nature of the monarchy had been violated. York had won the day. He escorted the king back to London with all outward respect, but everyone knew who was really in charge now. York was made Lord Protector of England, ruling in the king's name. The spark had ignited a fire. But this was far from the end. It was only the beginning. Queen Margaret would not stand by and see her family's power stripped away. She fled the court and began to rally supporters to her cause, the House of Lancaster. The nobility of England was now faced with an impossible choice. There was no middle ground left. You were for York, or you were for the king, which really meant you were for the queen. Families were torn apart. Father against son, brother against brother. Long-standing local feuds were now swept up into this national conflict. If your neighbor declared for York, you might declare for Lancaster simply out of spite. Allegiances shifted like sand. Oaths were made and broken. The entire country began to fracture along these new, bloody fault lines. The White Rose of York versus the Red Rose of Lancaster. All across the land, the preparations for a wider war began. In the great halls of castles, lords pledged their swords and their men to one side or the other. In the armories, the clang of hammers on steel echoed day and night, as armor was readied and blades were sharpened. Messengers galloped along muddy roads, carrying secret letters and calls to arms. A sense of dread and grim anticipation settled over the kingdom. The fog of war began to descend, both literally and figuratively. Early morning mists concealed advancing armies on the battlefield, leading to confusion and brutal, close-quarters fighting. But a fog of uncertainty also clouded the minds of the people. Who was the rightful ruler? Who was the traitor? What would the future hold? The conflict wasn't just fought with longbows and bills. It was a war of propaganda, of legitimacy, of loyalty. The initial battles were often chaotic and decisive. Places like Blore Heath and Ludford Bridge became the next bloody chapters in the story. Fortunes changed quickly. One moment, York was the protector of the realm. The next, he was a declared traitor, forced to flee to Ireland with his allies scattered. Queen Margaret's Lancastrian forces would seem triumphant, only to be met with a New Yorkist army rising from another corner of the kingdom. This wasn't a clean war of opposing armies meeting on a single field. It was a series of ambushes, sieges, and brutal skirmishes. It was a vicious cycle of retribution. A victory for one side meant executions and the seizure of lands for the other, which only fueled the hatred and the desire for revenge. The country was bleeding, and the wound was getting deeper with every clash of steel. The challenge that Richard of York had made had unleashed forces he could no longer control. The demand for reform had spiraled into a dynastic civil war. The kingdom was broken, and the path ahead was shrouded in the smoke of battle and the mist of an uncertain dawn. The Wars of the Roses had begun in earnest, a conflict that would drench the fields of England in blood for 3 long decades. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for the next chapter in this epic saga. Imagine the scene in London, a city weary of war, now erupting in celebration for its handsome, charismatic new monarch. At just 19, he was the image of a medieval king, tall, formidable, and fresh from the battlefield, where he'd proven his right to rule not with words, but with cold, hard steel. His coronation at Westminster Abbey was a spectacle of Yorkist power, a sea of white roses and suns in splendor. The air crackled with triumph, with the promise of a new beginning. But what of the old king? Henry VI, the pious, gentle man who was never suited for the brutal game of thrones, was now a fugitive. They were like ghosts of a former reign, their pleas for aid growing fainter with each passing month. The Lancastrian resistance flickered, with battles like Hedgeley Moor and Hexham in 1464, but these were the last, desperate gasps of a dying cause. One by one, their loyal commanders were captured and executed. The Red Rose of Lancaster was wilting. The climax of this manhunt came in 1465. After years on the run, Hiding in barns and secret passages, Henry VI was finally betrayed and captured. Picture this broken king, stripped of his finery, being led through the streets of London, the very people who once cheered him now jeering. He was taken to the Tower of London, not as a guest, but as a prisoner. The symbol of Lancastrian rule was now caged. For Edward IV, this was the ultimate triumph. His rival was locked away, his own throne seemingly secure. The great nobles of the realm, seeing the direction of the wind, flocked to pledge their loyalty to the House of York. With the main Lancastrian threat neutralized, Edward IV could finally begin the real work of a king, governing. He projected an image of strength and stability. He was a king for the people, accessible and charming, a stark contrast to the remote and often absent Henry VI. He was also a shrewd businessman, keen on restoring the kingdom's finances, which had been drained by years of mismanagement and war. He promoted trade, reformed the royal household, and made sure the crown's coffers started to fill up again. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed like England could finally enjoy peace and prosperity under a strong, capable Yorkist king. But even in this golden hour of triumph, shadows were beginning to lengthen. The very foundation of Edward's power was a man as ambitious and powerful as any king, his cousin, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick. Known as the Kingmaker, Warwick had been the architect of the Yorkist victory. His wealth, his armies, and his political cunning had put Edward on the throne. And Warwick expected to be the power asterisk behind asterisk the throne. He saw himself as the senior partner in this new government, the man who would guide the young king and reap the rewards. This created a quiet but potent tension at the heart of the court. While the banners of the White Rose flew proudly over England, a new conflict was brewing, not on the battlefield, but within the inner circle of the Yorkist regime itself. It was a clash of wills, a struggle for control between a king who wanted to rule in his own right and the powerful subject who believed he had made that king. The triumph of York was complete, but it was also fragile. The very forces that had brought Edward to power contained the seeds of his future troubles. The uneasy quiet that settled over England was not the peace of a settled kingdom, but the calm before another storm. The Wars of the Roses were far from over. Thanks for watching, and if you're fascinated by this epic struggle for the crown, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for the next chapter in our series. Just when you thought it was all over, the Red Rose roars back to life. Welcome to one of the most astonishing comebacks in English history. Edward IV sits on the throne, the Lancastrians are scattered, and Henry VI is a prisoner in the Tower of London. The Yorkist sun seems to be shining brighter than ever, but in the world of medieval politics, nothing is ever truly settled, and the wheels of fortune are always turning. The architect of this incredible reversal, none other than the indomitable Queen Margaret of Anjou, defeated but never broken. She's been in exile, tirelessly working, plotting, and forging alliances. Imagine her, a queen without a kingdom, moving across the courts of Europe, a political storm in human form, rallying support for her husband and her son. She is the heart of the Lancastrian resistance, a constant threat that the Yorkists underestimated. And she finds an unlikely, yet powerful, ally. Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, the man they called the Kingmaker. Yes, the very same man who put Edward IV on the throne. But Warwick and Edward have had a massive falling out. The Kingmaker feels disrespected, his advice ignored, his power base threatened by the Queen's family, the Woodvilles. Warwick, a man of immense pride and ambition, is not someone you want as an enemy. He feels betrayed by the king he created, and when a kingmaker feels betrayed, he decides to unmake a king. So, the unthinkable happens. Warwick, the ultimate Yorkist, switches sides. He secretly meets with his old arch-nemesis, Queen Margaret. Can you even imagine the tension in that room? Two of the most powerful figures of the age, who have been at each other's throats for years, now united by a common enemy, Edward IV. It's a political masterstroke, a deal sealed by the marriage of Warwick's daughter, and Neville, to Margaret's son, Prince Edward of Lancaster. The enemy of my enemy is now my son-in-law. With Warwick's military genius and French backing secured by Margaret, the plan is set in motion. In the autumn of 1470, Warwick lands in England. The country, weary of Edward's rule and still loyal to the old kingmaker, rises in support. Edward IV is caught completely off guard. He had grown complacent, enjoying the spoils of kingship, and didn't see the storm gathering until it broke right over his head. His support melts away like snow in spring. With no army to fight for him, Edward has no choice but to flee. He escapes across the Channel to Burgundy, a king in exile. And so, the political seesaw swings violently back. In London, the gates of the Tower are opened, and out walks Henry VI. He's frail, bewildered, more of a holy man than a king, but he is wearing the crown once more. This period is known as the readeption of Henry VI. For the Lancastrians, it's a moment of pure triumph. Their king is restored, their enemies are scattered. The red rose blooms again over England. It's a dizzying, sudden surge of hope. It seems like the war is finally won, and the House of Lancaster is secure. But this is the Wars of the Roses. The story is never that simple. This comeback, as spectacular as it was, is built on a fragile alliance of convenience between Margaret and Warwick. They still don't trust each other. Warwick is the real power behind the throne, ruling in Henry's name, while Margaret and her son wait in France, preparing to return. The whole situation is a powder keg waiting for a spark. Across the water, the exiled Edward IV is not sitting idle. He's not the type to give up. He's gathering funds, ships, and a new army. He's biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to reclaim what he believes is his. The Lancastrian Restoration, this incredible return to power, rests on a knife's edge. The country holds its breath. They've seen the crown change hands before, and they know the peace is fragile. The seesaw of power has swung one way, but the momentum is already building to swing back again. The brief reign of the readeption is just the calm before an even greater storm. The final, bloody chapter of this conflict is about to be written. The kingmaker has restored a king, but another king is coming back from across the sea, and he wants his throne. The stage is set for a climactic showdown that will decide the fate of England once and for all. What a chapter in this epic saga! The return of the Lancastrians shows us that in the Game of Thrones, you're never truly out of the fight. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you're enjoying this series, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The year is 1471. England holds its breath. A king, once exiled, has returned. This isn't just a war for a crown anymore. It's a deeply personal, tragic struggle that will tear the heart out of the kingdom. This is the story of how the Wars of the Roses turned into a bitter family feud, where brother turned against brother, and loyalty became the rarest of treasures. Edward IV, the golden son of York, had been driven from his own kingdom. Forced to flee to Burgundy, he left behind a throne usurped by the very man who had helped him claim it. Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, forever known as the Kingmaker. Warwick, allied with his old enemies the Lancastrians, had reinstated the frail Henry VI. To many, it seemed the House of York was finished, but they underestimated Edward. Landing on the storm-lashed coast of Yorkshire with a small, determined force, Edward began a daring gamble. Initially, he didn't even claim the throne. He claimed he was only there to reclaim his rightful title as Duke of York. It was a clever move, a political masterstroke that eased local fears and allowed him to gather support. But as his army swelled, marching south towards London, his true intentions became clear. This was a reconquest. London, ever pragmatic, opened its gates to the charismatic Yorkist king. Edward had his queen, his family, and his capital back. But the real test was yet to come. Warwick the Kingmaker was marching to meet him, and with him was Edward's own brother, George, Duke of Clarence. Clarence, ambitious and easily swayed, had betrayed Edward, joining Warwick in rebellion and marrying his daughter. The thought must have haunted Edward, to face not just his old mentor, but his own blood, across a battlefield. The stage was set for a confrontation that would define the age. As dawn broke on a foggy Easter Sunday near the town of Barnet, two armies prepared for battle. The fog was so thick, so disorienting, that men could barely see the banners of the soldiers standing next to them. This confusion would prove fatal. In the heart of the chaos, Clarence made a choice that would change everything. He abandoned Warwick. Riding across the misty fields, he realigned his forces with his brother, Edward. It was a stunning reversal, a moment of reconciliation amidst the carnage. Or was it simple, cold-blooded opportunism? We'll never truly know his heart. The Battle of Barnet was a brutal, confusing, and bloody affair. The poor visibility caused a tragic error. One Lancastrian contingent, led by the Earl of Oxford, mistook another allied force for the enemy. Seeing their star with stream's badge as Edward's son in splendor, they attacked their own side. The Lancastrian line collapsed into panic and accusations of treason. In the swirling mist and confusion, Warwick the Kingmaker, the man who had placed kings on thrones and pulled them down like chess pieces, found his luck had finally run out. His army disintegrated. Trying to flee the field, he was cut down. The great political puppet master of England lay dead in the mud. His death was a seismic event. For years, he had been the center of power, the axis around which the kingdom turned. Now, he was gone, but Edward's fight wasn't over. As news of Barnet spread, the remaining Lancastrian threat, Queen Margaret of Anjou and her son, Prince Edward, landed in the west of England. They were the last hope for the Red Rose. They gathered their remaining loyalists and made a desperate push to join forces with supporters in Wales. King Edward, wasting no time, marched his victorious but exhausted army to intercept them. The two forces finally met at Tewkesbury. This was not a battle of tactics and fog. This was a slaughter. The Lancastrian army was cornered, their backs to the River Severn. The Yorkist charge was relentless. The Lancastrian lines broke, and the retreat turned into a massacre. In the chaos of the battle, the Lancastrian heir, Prince Edward of Westminster, was killed. He was just 17 years old. With his death, the direct line of the House of Lancaster was extinguished. To secure his victory, King Edward made one final, ruthless move. On the very night he returned triumphant to London, the old, frail King Henry VI died in the Tower. The official story was that he died of melancholy and displeasure upon hearing of his son's death. But few in England believed it. It was widely understood that he had been murdered on Edward's orders. A loose end tied up, a rival dynasty erased. Edward IV was king once more, his throne secured with iron and blood. He had faced down his enemies, survived betrayal from his own family, and eliminated the entire Lancastrian royal line. The son of York shone brightly over England once again, but the kingdom was scarred. Manors had been burned, ancient families destroyed, and the bonds of kinship broken. This wasn't just a political victory, it was a personal tragedy played out on a national stage. The war had shown its ugliest face, one where personal ambition and family rivalry fueled the flames of civil war. Edward's reign would bring a decade of relative peace and prosperity, a golden age for the House of York. But the seeds of future conflict had been sown. The betrayal by his brother Clarence would not be forgotten, and another brother, the young Richard, Duke of Gloucester, had learned brutal lessons on the fields of Barnet and Tewkesbury. The ghosts of this conflict would linger, waiting for their moment to rise again. The story of the House of York and the Wars of the Roses was far from over. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into England's past compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more tales of power, betrayal, and conflict. See you next time. The year is 1483. The sun has set on the reign of King Edward IV. His young son, Edward V, is the rightful heir, but a storm is gathering. His uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, is the Lord Protector. But protection is the last thing on his mind. Ambition, sharp and cold as a dagger, drives him. Richard makes his move, swift and ruthless. He declares Edward's children illegitimate, seizing the throne for himself. He becomes King Richard III. The young princes, Edward and his brother Richard, are taken to the Tower of London, and then they vanish. Whispers turn to accusations. Did their own uncle murder them? The realm is steeped in fear and uncertainty. Richard's crown, claimed with such audacity, rests uneasily on his head. He is a king haunted by the ghosts of his own making, his legitimacy questioned at every turn. His reign is a desperate struggle, a constant battle against rebellions and conspiracies. He trusts no one, because no one trusts him. The very foundations of the House of York, which his brother Edward had fought so hard to secure, begin to crumble under the weight of his tyranny. Across the English Channel, another player watches and waits. Henry Tudor, a Welsh nobleman with a distant, almost threadbare claim to the throne through the Lancastrian line, has been living in exile for years. He is the last great hope for those who despise Richard. He is an unknown quantity, a gamble, but for many, any alternative is better than the bloody rule of the usurper king. Henry spends years gathering support, forging alliances with disgruntled English nobles, and securing French aid. He is patient, calculating. He knows his chance will come, and when it does, he must not fail. The hopes of the Lancastrian cause, and of all those who seek to end the brutal civil war, rest squarely on his shoulders. He is more than just a claimant, he is a symbol of a new beginning, a chance to heal the wounds that have bled England for decades. In August 1485, the moment arrives. Henry Tudor and his small army of English exiles and French mercenaries land at Milford Haven in Wales. It's a massive gamble. His force is small, his resources limited. But as he marches inland, something incredible happens. The Welsh people, seeing one of their own with a dragon banner held high, flock to his cause. His army swells. Support from powerful English families, who had secretly pledged their allegiance, begins to materialize. The Stanley family, one of the most powerful in England, plays a dangerous double game, offering vague promises to both Henry and Richard, waiting to see which way the wind will blow. Richard, hearing of the invasion, is enraged but not surprised. He has been expecting this. He summons his own formidable army, a force that vastly outnumbers Henry's. He is the king, a proven warrior, and he will crush this Welsh upstart. The two armies march towards each other, on a collision course with destiny. The fate of England will be decided, not in a palace, but in the mud and blood of a field in Leicestershire. The morning of August 22, 1485, dawns grey and damp over a field near Market Bosworth. Richard III, clad in gleaming armor, a golden crown fixed over his helmet, surveys his massive army. He has the numbers, the position, the experience. Victory seems assured. On the other side of the field, Henry Tudor, less experienced in battle, looks at his smaller, more ragged force. Between them lie the armies of the Stanleys, thousands of men under Lord Thomas Stanley and his brother William. Standing aloof, their banners still, they are the wild card. Their decision will likely decide the day. The battle begins. Cannons roar, and the air fills with the hiss of arrows. The vanguard of both armies clashes in a brutal, grinding melee. Men scream, steel rings on steel, and the muddy ground is churned into a red paste. For hours, the fight hangs in the balance. Richard's commander, the Duke of Norfolk, is killed, a major blow to the royalist morale. But Richard's line holds firm. He is everywhere, a whirlwind of royal fury, fighting in the thick of it, inspiring his men. Then, Richard sees it. Across the battlefield, he spots Henry Tudor's banner, the Red Dragon of Wales, and the standard of the Tudors, moving with only a small contingent of bodyguards. It's an opportunity, a mad, desperate, but potentially decisive gamble. If he can cut down Henry, the rebellion will collapse. The war will be over, with a cry of treason. Richard lowers his lance and leads his personal household cavalry in a frantic, do-or-die charge directly at Henry. It is a moment of pure, medieval fury. The king himself, a crowned monarch, charging like a common knight to kill his rival. He crashes into Henry's bodyguard, his skill as a warrior undeniable. He unhorses a giant of a man, Sir John Chain, and kills Henry's standard-bearer, Sir William Brandon. He is within a sword's length of Henry Tudor himself. The fate of England hangs on this single, desperate moment. But just as Richard is about to strike the final blow, the waiting is over. Sir William Stanley makes his choice. His fresh troops, thousands of them, slam into the flank of Richard's charging knights. The royal charge is halted, swamped, and overwhelmed. Richard's men are cut down around him. He is surrounded, hopelessly outnumbered, but he refuses to flee. Cries of a horse, my kingdom for a horse, would be attributed to him later, a legend of his final moments. But on that day, he fights on, a cornered boar, a king to the very last. He is pulled from his horse, his crown knocked into a thorn bush. The blows rain down, and King Richard III, the last Plantagenet king of England, is killed on the field of battle. His banner, the white boar, is torn and trampled into the mud. The battle is over. The House of York is finished. A soldier finds the fallen crown and presents it to Henry Tudor, who is crowned King Henry VII right there on the bloody field of Bosworth. A new dynasty is born from the chaos. The Wars of the Roses are finally over. The Tudor age has begun. Thanks so much for watching. This battle was a huge turning point in English history, ending one era and beginning another. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, please hit that like button and subscribe for more epic stories. Let us know in the comments what historical event you'd like to see next. See you in the next video. After 30 long, bloody years, the Wars of the Roses had finally reached their brutal climax. The last Plantagenet king, Richard III, lay dead on Bosworth Field, and a new man, a Welshman with a tenuous but potent claim to the throne, had seized the crown. This was Henry Tudor, now Henry VII, the first king of a new dynasty. His victory was more than just a win on the battlefield. It was the dawn of a new era for England, but the crown sat uneasily on his head. England was a nation fractured by decades of civil war, exhausted by bloodshed, and deeply suspicious of yet another new ruler. The ghosts of the House of York and the House of Lancaster still lingered, their loyalties dividing families and towns. Henry knew that military might alone could not heal these wounds. To secure his throne and bring lasting peace, he needed something more powerful than an army. He needed a symbol of unity, a gesture so profound it could mend the broken heart of a kingdom. And so, Henry made a decision that would change the course of English history. He announced his intention to marry Elizabeth of York, the eldest daughter of the late King Edward IV and sister to the lost princes in the Tower. This was a masterstroke of political genius. Elizabeth was the living embodiment of the House of York. By marrying her, Henry, the Lancastrian victor, wasn't just taking a wife. He was bridging the chasm that had torn England apart. The Red Rose of Lancaster would finally join with the White Rose of York. This marriage was not a mere political arrangement. It was the symbolic healing of a nation's deepest wound. The announcement sent ripples of hope across the land. For the first time in a generation, people dared to dream of a future free from the constant fear of civil war. The royal wedding, held in January of 1486, was an event of unparalleled significance. It was a spectacle designed to broadcast a clear message: the war is over. The union of Henry and Elizabeth was a public declaration that the old enmities were being laid to rest. Imagine the scene at Westminster Abbey, the solemnity, the weight of history hanging in the air. Here stood the Lancastrian king, a man who had spent much of his life in exile, now taking the hand of the Yorkist princess, a woman who had known both the pinnacle of power and the depths of uncertainty. Their vows were not just personal promises, they were a pledge to the entire realm. A pledge of peace, stability, and a new beginning. For the common people, who had suffered the most during the endless conflict, this marriage was the tangible proof they had been longing for. It was a reason to believe that their children might grow up in a world without the constant clash of armies. From this union, a new symbol was born, one that would come to define an entire age: the Tudor Rose. This wasn't just a clever piece of branding. It was a powerful emblem of reconciliation. The design ingeniously combined the red petals of the Lancastrian rose with the white petals of the Yorkist rose. The white rose was placed inside the red, creating a single, unified flower. This new symbol began appearing everywhere: on buildings, on coins, in royal documents. Every time an English person saw the Tudor rose, they were reminded of the peace that had been forged. It was a constant, visual reinforcement of the new reality. Lancaster and York were no longer two warring factions, but two houses united under one crown, one dynasty. The Tudor rose became the ultimate symbol of a nation reborn, a testament to the idea that even the deepest divisions could be overcome. The birth of their first son, Prince Arthur, in September 1486, cemented the dynasty's future. This was not just any royal birth, this was the arrival of an heir who embodied the union of the two houses. Arthur was the grandson of a Lancastrian supporter and a Yorkist king. In his veins ran the blood of both rival factions, now mingled in a single line of succession. His very existence was a promise of continuity and stability. The naming of the prince was also a deliberate and brilliant move. By naming him Arthur, Henry VII was invoking the legendary King Arthur of Camelot, tapping into the deep, mythic past of Britain. It was a way of suggesting that his reign, the Tudor reign, would be a new golden age, a return to greatness, a new Camelot for England. The celebration of Arthur's birth was a celebration of the nation's future, a future secured not by the sword, but by marriage, birth, and brilliant symbolism. With his position secured, Henry VII proved to be a shrewd and capable ruler. He was not a warrior king in the mold of his predecessors. His battles were fought not on the fields of England, but in the halls of government and finance. He was meticulous, cautious, and some might say, famously frugal. After decades of royal overspending and economic chaos caused by the wars, Henry's priority was to refill the royal coffers and restore economic stability. He reformed the tax system, clamped down on corruption among the nobility, and promoted trade. His methods weren't always popular with the powerful lords who had grown accustomed to acting with impunity, but they were incredibly effective. He understood that a wealthy king was a powerful king, and a stable economy was the bedrock of a peaceful nation. He was building England back, not with grand gestures, but with careful, methodical, and relentless administration. Of course, the path to stability was not without its challenges. The embers of the old conflict still glowed, and several pretenders emerged to challenge Henry's throne. There was Lambert Simnel, a boy coach to impersonate the Earl of Warwick, a Yorkist claimant Henry held in the Tower of London. Then, more seriously, there was Perkin Warbeck, who for years convinced many across Europe that he was Richard of Shrewsbury, the younger of the two lost princes in the Tower. Each of these plots tested the new king's resolve. But Henry handled them with a mixture of firmness and cleverness. He defeated Simnel's army in battle, but then, in a remarkable act of clemency and political theater, he pardoned the boy and gave him a job in the royal kitchens. It was a move designed to show both strength and magnanimity. He dealt with Warbeck more sternly, eventually executing him after repeated escape attempts. Through it all, Henry demonstrated that the Tudor dynasty was here to stay, and that any attempt to reignite the flames of the Wars of the Roses would be extinguished. As Henry's reign progressed, England was transformed. The power of the old, feuding nobility was curtailed. The king's law, not the local lord's whim, began to hold sway across the land. A new class of administrators, men of talent rather than just birth, rose to prominence. The foundations of a modern, centralized state were being laid. Trade flourished, particularly the wool trade with Europe, bringing new wealth into the country. England, for so long an unstable and inward-looking nation, began to look outwards once more. Henry VII's reign might lack the high drama of the wars that preceded it or the theatricality of his famous son, Henry VIII, but its importance cannot be overstated. He was the great healer, the stabilizer, the man who took a broken, bankrupt, and war-torn country and made it whole again. He laid the foundation upon which his son and granddaughter, Elizabeth I, would build England into a major European power. By the time Henry VII died in 1509, he left behind a very different England from the one he had found. He passed on a secure throne, a full treasury, and a peaceful, unified kingdom to his second son, the future Henry VIII. The Wars of the Roses, that long, dark chapter in English history, were finally a distant memory. The violent cycle of deposition and usurpation was broken. The Tudor dynasty was firmly established, its rose a symbol not of conflict, but of enduring peace. The legacy of Henry VII is the story of how a nation can recover from deep trauma. It's a testament to the power of shrewd politics, strategic union, and the relentless pursuit of stability. The victorious cry at Bosworth Field, "God save King Henry," had been answered. He had not only saved himself, he had saved England, paving the way for one of the most dynamic and transformative periods in its history. So concludes our journey through the Wars of the Roses, from the first whispers of dissent to the final, unifying marriage. It was a saga of ambition, betrayal, and incredible resilience. The story of the Tudors was just beginning, built on the ashes of the Plantagenet kings. Thank you so much for watching this series. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into English history, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories like this one. We've journeyed through the bloody battles, the shifting allegiances, and the reigns of kings won and lost. But now, we stand at the end of the conflict, with Henry Tudor on the throne. Today, we're exploring the most crucial part, the legacy. Why do these wars, fought over 5 centuries ago, still matter? But the Wars of the Roses took a sledgehammer to this structure. Entire male lines of powerful families were extinguished on the battlefield or executed afterward. Think about it. The powerful Duke of Somerset, the mighty Earl of Warwick, even the princes in the Tower. By the time Henry VII picked up his crown at Bosworth Field, many of the king-making, realm-destabilizing figures were simply gone. So, he systematically dismantled the old feudal power structure. He passed laws against livery and maintenance, the practice of nobles keeping private armies. Suddenly, that force of 1,000 men wearing the Percy Crescent or the Neville badge was illegal. Henry VII was famously frugal, but he was also incredibly shrewd. He built up the crown's wealth not just by taxing his people, but by seizing the lands of those who fell in the wars or rebelled against him. More land meant more income, more power, and less reliance on the nobility for funds or soldiers. The king's power was becoming absolute, centralized in London, not scattered across the castles of the north and west. We see a shift from the king being the first among equals to being the undisputed master of the realm. The crumbling, war-torn castles of the medieval barons were giving way to the centralized, bureaucratic power of the Tudor state. Henry established new bodies of government like the Court of Star Chamber, designed to enforce the king's law on even the most powerful subjects. His son, Henry VIII, would inherit this powerful machine and use it to enact even more radical changes, like the break with Rome. None of that would have been possible without the groundwork laid after the Wars of the Roses. The conflict didn't just end a dynasty. It ended an entire era of English governance, but the legacy isn't just political. Henry VII's court and even more so Henry VIII, became a center for this new learning. This was the dawn of the English Renaissance, a golden age of literature and drama that would eventually give us William Shakespeare. And speaking of Shakespeare, that brings us to our final, and perhaps most fascinating, legacy, the story itself. How do we even know about the Wars of the Roses? For most people, the answer is Shakespeare. His history plays Richard II, Henry IV, Henry V, Richard III are the primary way this story has been told for centuries. But here's the crucial part. Shakespeare wasn't a historian. He was a dramatist, writing under a Tudor monarch, Queen Elizabeth I, the granddaughter of Henry VII. His plays had a political purpose, to legitimize the Tudor dynasty. How did he do this? By painting the period before them as a chaotic, bloody nightmare caused by the weakness and wickedness of the old rulers. And who is the ultimate villain of this piece? Richard III. Shakespeare's Richard is a monstrous, deformed tyrant, a caricature of evil who serves as the perfect foil for the heroic savior, Henry Tudor. This is where history and myth become inseparable. The real Richard III was almost certainly not the hunchbacked villain of the play. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the legacy of the wars, please hit that like button and subscribe for more.
As we close this chapter of the Chrono Archives, remember, the past is never truly gone. It waits patiently in the shadows of forgotten ruins, in the echoes of ancient voices, and in the timeless lessons that still guide us today. It waits to be remembered by curious minds like yours. Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey through the annals of time. If today's exploration of lost civilizations, mythical legends, or historical enigmas ignited your passion for the past, hit that like button, drop a comment with your favorite moment or what you'd love to see next, and most importantly, subscribe to the Chrono Archives and continue the journey through time. Turn on notifications so you never miss an episode where we unearth buried secrets, decode ancient mysteries, and bring history's greatest stories back to life. Together, we'll keep the flame of the past burning bright. Until next time, fellow time travelers, keep questioning, keep discovering, and keep remembering. The Chrono Archives, where the past lives forever.